Hi, Devlina. Welcome to Resolve.
Hi, I'm Devleena. I am a development sector professional. I currently lead the research and MEL sector vertical at Climate Asia. MEL is monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which is a part of research again. And primarily, I'm a gender and education policy specialist. By development sector, it's a non-profit or social sector or corporate social responsibility or CSR. But yeah, I mean, basically doing any kind of education or health or wellness work with the marginalized community. Um, and it's not like it's a broad sector because there's a lot of work to do in India, I guess, in that field.
Is there a specific clientele that you work with, or
No.
is it across all industries?
So currently, the kind of work that I'm doing is it spans across gender and climate, and I'm a researcher, so that essentially means I am generating evidence for policy interventions. So, for instance, if I just have to break it down, if I'm saying that okay, this community needs XYZ. So I am generating the evidence of what the community needs. And then once you deliver the need, then I'm generating evidence for okay, has this really worked? Whatever you did it really work for them? And what has been the impact? So it's across all things, but I guess climate is one cross-cutting theme that we are seeing that goes across sectors because it affects health, it affects nutrition, it affects gender, it affects education, it affects lifestyle, it affects farmers' health, crop nutrition, everything. So it is slightly cross-cutting, but it's also a little specific because I primarily focus on gender.
What qualifications does one need to become a research analyst?
I think I'm okay. So it's not for an analyst. You need to have, I guess, a certain level of masters, professional, and this and that. I don't. I'm not an analyst per se. I do a broad spectrum of research work. Um, but I also work with a lot of young people in my team, and the one thing that I feel one needs to be a researcher is curiosity and interest. Because especially when we're hiring, we don't look at the qualifications a person is bringing as much as are they asking the right questions, are they reading the right things, are they curious, are they genuinely interested in learning more about the field, because it is research by definition is uncovering new things every day. So we are probably looking at more life skills than sector specific skills per se.
Is this something that is common across all research jobs?
Not really. So I did my PhD. So I do have core research skills, which are analysis, writing, analysis meaning quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. So working with data, uncovering insights from interviews, coding. So yes, so those are very critical core skills that one can also bring, and that helps if you want to grow in this field. Um, and it depends on like no research job is what do I say? It's not really a unidirectional job. Depends on the kind of research that you're doing and the kind of skills that they are bringing in. If you're in a very core technical research firm and that's doing, let's say, research on crop health, you will need those skills. You need to know about what it means to have good crop. What does it mean to have good soil? What does the soil need, etc., etc. So you get what I'm saying. So every sector has its own area of expertise, and it always helps to have that knowledge if you are looking to build in this.
For somebody who does not have the qualifications but feels that they might enjoy or they might be a fit in this industry, can they begin by just interning or volunteering to understand how the field is,
Yes.
and then can they start progressing in it?
Absolutely, because I think all NGOs, a lot of NGOs are doing MEL work. I mean, they have to do MEL work. MEL again meaning monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So, if you're doing any intervention, which NGOs typically do, you are going to figure out the impact assessment and all of that, and all NGOs have to do that. Typically, NGOs are underfunded, as you already know. So, I wouldn't say that internships will pay a lot, or in most cases, pay at all. But they'll give you a lot of experience, which unfortunately doesn't cut it, I guess. But yes, there's a lot of space for younger professionals in the field, because there are many moving parts to this kind of work. There's data collection, there is question development, there's tool development, there's analysis, and so there's a lot happening. And I guess my experience has also been with the people that I've worked so far here. They are very eager to hone new talent and hone people to learn these skills, because these are more and more going to be relevant in the future. Because, I mean, 10 years back, these kind of jobs didn't even exist. And nobody's typically training you for these jobs, right? Like for an engineering job, there is an engineering degree, but for a development sector professional, I mean, now you have an MA in development practices and this and that. So yes, those courses are also coming up, but they are few and spread apart. But yeah, typically a lot of the learning is happening on the job. And so the sector is generally very open to having young people come in and, just experience certain things. I know several organizations that just have interns on a rolling basis. So there's a lot of scope for young people to experience things. If you're pursuing your education, then I'm guessing you will not be able to go on field. But you should be able to do some literature review, you should be able to do some writing, you should be able to do some analysis. So, like I said, a lot of moving parts just generally in the job, and there's a lot of work that young people can do.
If there is a student or a professional who'd like to reach out to somebody within probably a research person, is there any platform where they could just connect with, or do they have to go through LinkedIn or any of these profiles to search for it?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is great. But also it'll help to go to the website of the organization that you really want to work at, or at least explore the sector that you want to work at. Like, for instance, if you want to understand gender, there are several organizations that particularly and specifically work on different aspects of gender almost in every city. So it will always help to go on their website and connect with somebody from that organization to learn about the opportunities that are there. There is no one platform that has all these opportunities, because again, internships are also not something that people really put out advertisements for. It's mostly like, if somebody approaches us, we are more than happy to see how they can be accommodated in the organization.
You talked about your work revolving around gender and climate change. Could you just help us understand by giving an example?
So, okay, very interesting. So, gender and climate change are actually intrinsically interlinked. Think about water scarcity. Think about rural economies. Now, the women are at home, and the women will need water for the most basic functions of their life, right? The women are also going far away to fetch water. So once your water table goes down because of climate change, which is what is happening in Maharashtra, right? That means now women have to walk a lot more to get that pail of water which their family needs. So eventually it puts a double burden on women because of depleting resources. Women are now having to walk more in extreme heat to get water, and they have to do this every day. So that is an example of the kind of work that we do. Like, this is one part of it, how climate change directly impacts gender. The other is tribal communities in Odisha, right? For instance, so if forest cover is depleting, the tribal communities entirely depend on forests for their sustenance, for not just fodder for their animals, but also food and medicines, right? These kind of things are specifically done by women to go to the forest and get food and to get leaves, which are medicinal leaves. And women have been at the forefront for many, many years in tribal Odisha, fighting for their rights, fighting against, I guess, certain policies that have come, which don't give them access to the forest anymore. And because of that, their lifestyle gets directly impacted because you don't have access to what used to be your food, what used to be your medicine, and what used to be your lives. So that's the intersection at which we work.
If this is the first step, gathering data regarding the challenges that women face, what follows this?
What follows this is usually policy. So, like I had said, a lot of my work is to generate evidence for policy action. So, this is the kind of evidence that we generate. Now, this is one kind of evidence that we are going on the ground and generating evidence. The other evidence is obviously what is happening to women across jobs or across, like let's say somebody is a C-suite level professional in a firm, a woman, I'm saying. Now, typically, what happens in those spaces is you have to travel a lot for your work, or you have to be available for after office parties and raising funds and things like that. Now, women, because of the burden of care work that they have to do at home, are unable to do that in the same intensity that men might be able to do. It's very interesting that in 2020, only 2% of climate finance was given to startups or entrepreneurs who were women, which means 98% of the funds went to men, which does not mean that women don't have great ideas or they don't have or they are not doing great work. It just means that how heavily gendered the entire sector is, because a lot of these conversations are happening in spaces where women are essentially unable to make it because of other responsibilities that they share at home. Now, these are the kinds of evidence that our research generates. And what we're looking at are policy shifts. Now, policy doesn't really mean government policy. Yes, it can mean government policy, but also organizational policy and also mindset shifts. So, for funding organizations to recognize that if they hold a wine and cheese event, which they usually do, which is where all the funding conversations happen, a lot of the women are unable to make it to these conversations. So perhaps we need a shift in how these funding conversations or where these funding conversations are happening so that women are also equally represented. So those are the kind of policy shifts or policy changes and mindset changes that we are looking at.
Interesting. I was interviewing a friend. He has a 10-month-old, but I asked him this: how do you find that work-life balance? He says it's a sacrifice I just have to make. They're willing to put in those 16 hours at work.
Yeah, but it's a sacrifice that you are making at the cost of what?
Yes. So he said, no, if I let go, there are going to be 10 people who are going to replace me. He said, I am expendable.
Yes, he should not feel that he needs to put in 16 hours to keep that job. And that's the shift that I'm talking about.
Yes.
It's not an individual. I will not put this responsibility on an individual man or a woman, but I'll put this responsibility on the organization where hundreds and thousands of such men and women work, saying that we stop work at 6, you go home and you do whatever needs to be done. No doubt that tomorrow, if I start putting 16 hours of work to whatever work I do, I will grow exponentially. I am not saying that my work is less or it's less important because I'm not putting in those 16 hours. I'm saying I'm making a conscious stop because this is the lifestyle that will sustain me. I do not intend to work for 40 years, 18 hours a day. I intend to work for the rest of my life, 10 hours a day.
10 hours.
So this is something that a woman once told me, which really resonated with me, is that we are in the 21st century with 20th century workplaces and 19th century ideas. So even until the 1960s, women were not in the workforce. The workforce, this 9 to 5, this 9 to 6 or 10 to 6 or whatever, was designed for men. Women just entered. So now what happens when women enter? Who takes care of the child at home? Unless you are paid a lot and you have like a nanny or whatever, which honestly only a very small percent of the population can afford to have that kind of care work, or you are extremely privileged and you live in a joint family where everything's great, whatever, very small percentage of the population again, somebody is going to have to give up, right? So either you're giving up on the idea of having a child entirely and you entirely focus on your career, or you're giving up or one person is giving up their career. Now I'm just saying that let's change how we see jobs itself, right? What is so urgent that it needs 16 to 18 hours? And if it does, why can't you hire two people to distribute that work? And honestly, I've heard all of it, Sandeep. I genuinely think it's possible. I've looked at, when we design these policies for other organizations, we look at their funding model. We look at how much money they have, what kind of salaries they are paying. And I genuinely think if it's possible for non-profits to do that, it is just a matter of intent. So I refuse to believe, unless somebody shows me evidence that if this happens, their company is going to be at a huge loss. I will refuse to believe that it's not possible.
Can you highlight some of your successes, achievements with respect to work?
In terms of achievements, I don't know. I mean, I guess putting out a research report is always seems like an achievement, because you put in so much energy into just doing that work for 2-3 years, and then you finally have a product, and then finally people reading your work, and and thinking about the work that you're putting out. So every report, every study, every article we put out seems like a big achievement and something to celebrate about, because it generates a conversation, the kind of conversation that we are having about what it means to have an equitable work environment, or what it means to have more women in education, or why is this not happening, or something like that.
So you mentioned that to put out a report, it takes 2-3 years to finish up a project. Can you elaborate more on that? So what are some of the things that go through in those 2 or 3 years? Why does it take 2-3 years?
No, so it depends. It depends on how you've designed the study, who's the donor, who's funding the study, why is the study happening in the first place. If it is a study that demands a lot of field work, that demands like excessive in-depth research, then of course it's going to take that amount of time. But yes, there are studies that happen in a span of 3 to 6 months also, and that's just because it is the need of the hour. It is a project that just needs that much energy. What goes into designing it is identifying a question that you need to answer, that you don't have an easy answer to. So identifying that question, figuring out how we'll go about answering that question, which becomes your data collection methodology. So are you going to do surveys? Are you going to do interviews? Are you going to do focus group discussions? Who are your stakeholders? Are you going to talk to women? Are you going to talk to men, children, teachers? Figuring all of that out. Going and doing that data collection, collecting that data, getting that information, cleaning up that information, reading that information very critically, which is the favorite part of any work I do, is then sitting with the data for hours on end, just trying to figure out what is it that my screen is telling me, what are the numbers that are jumping out at me, what are the things that are jumping out at me, what am I uncovering, what has been said, what has not been said, and then putting it all out as a cohesive article or a report, or like any product that can eventually then be a consumable format for the population to understand the question that we were trying to answer.
So finally, any suggestions to somebody who'd like to take up a career in research?
Just be curious.
Okay.
Just be curious. Keep asking questions. Do not stop asking questions. Ask as many questions as you can. If you can answer those questions, great. That means the work has already happened. If you are unable to uncover answers to those questions, then you have a research question that you need to go and seek out answers for. And the other piece of advice would be to be open to learning. Because like I said, 10 years back, if you had asked me, is this the kind of work that you want to do? I would not have said yes, because the job that I'm doing today didn't even exist 10 years ago. So the workforce and the kind of jobs that this space has is constantly evolving. In the next 10 years, I don't even know what it will change to, or the kind of skills we'll have. We now have AI. We now have AI generated reports. We now have AI to do data collection. So I don't know what 10 years later it's going to look like for the workforce, but that just means that one has to be adaptable and one has to learn constantly. So just because school is over or college is over or whatever, that doesn't mean you've stopped learning. You just have to keep learning and keep upskilling yourself, as they say.
My understanding is once the findings are out, there might be a lot of people who disagree with with you. How do you deal with this?
People disagree with opinions, and it's harder to refute an opinion. But people don't disagree with data as much. The moment you put data and numbers into those things, it is much harder for people to then say that this is not true. Because I'm when I'm presenting my study, I don't go with, hey, this is my opinion. I go with, this is the study we did, this is the data collection. We put it all out there, right? And this is the result. Now this is for you to take the way you want to take. So this is a scientifically developed research design that generated these results. You are free to do your research. You can go do it yourself and see what comes out. But people find it much harder to refute data, and especially when we put I can give you an example. For a long time, I think we all knew that the education system in India wasn't doing great or was failing for that matter. And then you had something called the ASER reports that came out, which went and did a systematic data collection on children's learning, mathematical and literacy learnings every year. Now you had figures to their learning. You had figures that said so many percentage of children in class 5 cannot read at class 2 level textbook. And it was much harder for people to refute that because it wasn't an opinion anymore. It wasn't somebody's experience. It was scientifically developed study that generated data across the country that said that this is true. And that's how we deal with it. So when people come and say, hey, this is not true, we're like, okay, this is the study. This is for you. Go figure it out, what you think of it. And this is what we have to say.
Thank you so much, Devleena, for making time for us once again from Resolve. Wish you all
Thank
the
you.
best. All the best.
All the best.